Hello and a very good morning to you. We're live in London and you're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today here at Midori House in London, my guests Yossi Mekelberg and Marta Lorimer will share their views on the week's biggest stories. Yossi, good morning. What have you spotted?
Good morning. A Brazilian judge orders suspension of X in dispute with Elon Musk. Internet prophet been arrested. Kleptocrats are not just stealing money but ruining democracy, and it's also the Venice Film Festival.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll get the latest headlines from the Nordics as well.
Latvia considers mandatory military service for women, Russians start panic selling their summer cabins in Finland, and Sweden goes bananas about bananas on pizza. I'm Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff, and I'll be bringing you the news from Northern Europe.
Plus, the Foreign Desk team will join me from Prague to give us the key takeaways from Globsec. It's the 1st of September 2024, live from London. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you. This time last week, we were standing in the middle of Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich watching Yossi Mekelberg on Sky News. We were live on air, and now we've got him off the screen and into the studio. A very good morning to you, Yossi.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming in and for actually doing it in person.
It's always nice to do it in place, especially on a Sunday.
Showing up is so much fun. And Marta, thank you so much. This is your first ride on Monocle on Sunday.
Yes, first time I have to get myself to a studio this early in the morning on a Sunday.
Welcome on board. It's lovely to have you. Marta, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been doing this week. Before we came on air, we were talking about the fact it's the start of the academic. Well, we're not quite back into academia yet, are we? But you live in London but work in Cardiff, and then we had the age-old row about shouldn't you actually go to work? But you said that you have a problem, or you used to have a problem insofar as you used to share an office with your best friend.
Yeah, I used to share an office with a really good friend, and the problem is that he's a philosopher, so it was quite amenable to having really extended and complicated conversation on all sorts of existential matters, which made it really, really hard for me to focus at work because I just wanted to talk.
I was about to say, what did you talk about? Because, you couldn't just come in and say, have you seen this in the shops? Because that would just appear, I don't know which philosopher would could sort of ascribe that level of depth to. But would you literally sit there and discuss everything?
You'd be surprised. I was teaching a course on the future, and my colleague happens to be an expert on time. So I could always come up with questions. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you have a question about Heidegger, and I could ask
all the time.
Every morning.
Do you wake up every morning, Yossi, and think about Heidegger?
Not necessarily, because sometimes, in my line of dealing with the issues, definitely in the last 11 months, there are obviously the philosophical sides of it, but also to do with the day-to-day, how you move, more with kind of policy-oriented, and what I'm going to say next on Monocle.
My
that
God.
Might make the listener...
What deep thinkers you are. I wake up and try and work out where my socks are. And it is not often for the globalists, so it might sometimes be dark. But there is that thing about sharing spaces with people and being able to work. And you said that your wife, Yossi, is, I'm not quite sure how often we sort of bring families into Monocle on Sunday, but your wife works in human rights.
Yes, she works for Peace Brigade International. We have 2 separate rooms that we work. We meet for sometimes breakfast, lunches, and the dog moves between us, whoever he wants to guard on the day or on the hour. So that's kind of the routine, unless she goes more to the office these days than me. And
how much time is spent discussing you deal with pretty serious subjects, and she'll deal with very serious subjects as well. How much does that actually become, part and parcel of the daily chat, in the same way that Marta and her colleague in the office were talking about Heidegger over tea? Do you find yourself sort of veering between, have you got the milk? Have you seen what's happening in the West Bank?
Definitely. And not on the West Bank, the organization deals with defenders of human rights in places like Guatemala or Thailand and other places. So she comes with great stories, or sometimes disturbing stories about attacks on defenders of human rights. I deal with the human rights in the Middle East and the security issue there. So always it comes as well. But then we need to deal also with the daily issues. When are we going to the supermarket? What are we cooking for the weekend? and doing some nice things as well. Or like last weekend, actually going together and watch QPR playing against Plymouth and having nice Lebanese food afterwards. So it's all one big mixture, which is probably life.
I know the regular listeners will know my other half is a television director, so our evenings are spent throwing things at the telly. That what we sometimes do is watch the news but with the sound down, and then have quite a lot of fun. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's that sort of sharing of space and that idea of actually setting time apart. What have you been doing this week, Marta? Are we back straight into academic work, or are we still soaking up some sun?
What sun? I was in Edinburgh over the weekend. I went to see a few shows at the Fringe, and that was great. The best part of it, of course, was the 6-hour train back, because it was the only one that still had somewhat affordable seating there. Briefly considered the bus, but then decided that I didn't want to do that to myself anymore. And then, most of the week I have spent preparing lectures because term is starting again at the end of next month. And I am just starting a new job, so I actually have to prepare all the lectures. So I spent the last 4 days reading about populism and thinking about what I think it's really important for my students to know.
Okay. Have you decided yet, or is it all going to be a surprise?
No, I've decided what they need to know about populism and democracy and the ideational approach to populism. And this week, I get to think about what they need to know about Brexit and Euroscepticism in France.
Excellent. And you've had a bit, and we'll come to the sort of the main meat and drink of our discussions in a little while, but you have had the summer of all summers when it comes to rewriting your lecture notes, haven't you?
Yes, it's been an interesting summer where I thought, oh great, we're going to have the EU elections and then I don't have to worry about it. It's going to be a relaxing summer. I won't have to think about anything. I get to go to Sardinia and spend some time in the sun. I was obviously wrong, because Emmanuel Macron decided that he was going to call a surprise election, and France still doesn't have a prime minister. So I've also been spending the rest of the week with the sort of live of Le Monde newspaper, trying to find out if France is getting a prime minister anytime soon.
Well, that will all come, I think, when Emmanuel Macron decides, because he likes to keep things on his own leash. Are you preparing to start teaching again, Yossi?
No, luckily, all my teaching is actually on the second term. So
okay.
I need to prepare a new module as well about dealing with crisis, surprise, in a very practical way.
Do you have to rewrite as you go along? I mean, you're both dealing in pretty dynamic subjects as well, that things are happening faster than you can actually write them down. And as soon as you revisit your lecture notes, you'll think actually that we need to revise and drop. It's like a conveyor belt, that something needs to drop off at one end in order for the next new fresh development to turn up.
I think the theoretical side still stays the theoretical side, but there is no problem all the time to talk to them about the Congress of Vienna of 1815 and make them really interested in that. So you need to really bring it up to date, and that's bring it to life. Something is relevant. So if you have European election, or you have obviously the last nearly a year now war in Gaza and beyond, in the Middle East is for Ukraine. So yes, the examples should be relevant and timely.
Yeah, I wake up every morning and I think about Vienna.
It's only 200 years, so hey.
Okay, let us head to Prague, because we're going to be going to Globsec. The Globsec Forum is an annual event that aims to enhance security, prosperity and sustainability in Europe. It's been taking place this weekend. The 19th edition is being held in Prague for the first time, and I'm delighted to say that the Monocle team is out there, and we can cross live to Chris Cermak, our senior news editor. A very good morning to you, Chris.
Good morning, Emma. I hope you can hear me amid all the hubbub, as Andrew Muller likes to say, of the Globsec convention.
There's a little bit of hub. There's a bit of hub, but not so much bub. So I think we'll be all right for a little while. Tell us what you're doing in Prague.
Oh my, Emma, it's been a dizzying couple of days. What can I say? I think we've done around, over 20 different interviews, 25 interviews. There's so many different people here. It's my first time at Globsec. Some of our colleagues, Andrew Muller has been here a couple of times before this as well. And it's just, it's a very interesting group of people, of course, mostly focused on European security. So we've spoken to a number of Czech ministers, Slovak ministers as well. We've spoken to French general, German general, Polish generals. It's just been a very interesting mix of people. Ukrainian, of course, ministers and defense minister as well. We've been speaking to. It's just been a really interesting mix of people. Obviously, Ukraine has been, the topic, but also just kind of in general, the mood, European security, how they're feeling, the divide between East and West, which I think has been particularly interesting as well. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, was here, and she talked about kind of the West can learn from the East and made that mark very pointedly, like, you were right about certain things and we in the West didn't quite see it. So it's been interesting to be in this part of the world.
It's an interesting thought that you raise there, this idea of East and West. We're looking on a day when there are elections in Eastern Germany, Saxony and Thüringen, which are likely to go very, very much towards the far right and Alternative für Deutschland. This idea now that the West is now accepting that within Europe, that the East and the West are still more than ever divided.
Well, divided, yes. And I think what's interesting is, though, even if you look at the East, like when you bring up something like the German elections in the former East, right, there are divisions within the East. And so it has been interesting, on the one hand, to talk about the East-West divide and have Western politicians say, the East is the one that understands what's happening here, the threat from Russia. But then we've also had the divisions within the East, as you say, Germany, Eastern Germany voting for the far right. The fact that we are here in Prague is in itself interesting as a side note, because Globsec, this Global Security Forum, is normally held in Bratislava. It's been held in Bratislava the last 18 years until this year. And that's because Slovakia has turned and has more of a populist government at the moment under Robert Fico. So that was a key reason why they came here. And there was a bit of an awkward moment last night when one of the speakers sort of said, "Hey, everybody, how about coming back to Prague next year?" And the room kind of fell a little bit. It just became very awkward. A few people cheered. Everyone else was a little bit silent, like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure where we should be."
So where do we stand on European unity then? I mean, we have Ursula von der Leyen there, and she's obviously got the hardest job of all, trying to lasso a bloc, which from about June onwards, very officially, very much was divided into two.
That is the question, isn't it? I think European unity in general is still pretty strong. I would say that most people, certainly the people that you speak to who come to this, talk up European unity a lot. That's what this conference is about. So it is about unity. It is about increasing European defense spending, understanding the threat from Russia, all of that. So when you speak to people here, I think there's a lot of agreement. But that said, I think it's more important to think about some of those people who are not there. I spoke to a former Slovakian foreign minister, Ivan Korčok, but, notedly former. The current Slovakian government is not here. So some of those populist elements are not here. I was on a panel that I moderated with a Hungarian journalist. She spoke all about the challenges in Hungary that she is facing, that she is, part of a smear campaign and called a Western intelligence agent. The Hungarian government is not here. So you are seeing that kind of dynamic, I think, where there's a little bit of an unspoken aspect, right, to this kind of conference, where everyone here talks about European unity, but we don't quite need to mention those people who aren't present and don't want to be part of that conversation.
What about the more interesting characters such as the Austrians? Because I know you're, as half Austrian yourself, you'll obviously take a keen eye on this, but there has been so much of a focus on the very complicated relationship that Austria still maintains with Russia.
Yeah, that is a good point. I've seen the former Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, around, who is his own interesting character, of course, himself indicted for crimes, but that's by the by. There is Austrian participation here as well. Schallenberg, one of the Austrian ministers, is here. The Austrians... I'm going to be honest about this, Emma. I think it's one of those interesting aspects that perhaps that the Austrians sometimes consider themselves very much the leaders of sort of a dialogue among Central European nations. I'm not always sure it's true the other way round. So I'm not getting the sense here that Austria is a huge amount of the discussion, as it were. There are some other times, I think, where maybe Austria has been more involved. In this case, I've heard some people talk more of looking to Germany. That's still a very key player in Europe and a key player that even Central and Eastern European nations are looking to, probably a little more than Austria.
Let's bring in Marta Lorimer, lecturer in politics in the School of Law and Politics at Cardiff University, and the guest around the table this morning on Monocle on Sunday. Marta, do you have any commentary on this one, given the fact that your focus is European populism, and it's something that's now pushing everything in different directions, isn't it? And feel free to ask Chris any questions if you need to get some information for your lectures.
Yeah, thank you. This is exactly the kind of content I am after for the practical examples that we'll talk about. But I think what's really interesting is precisely the fact that there is this division. But what's also interesting, I think, is that there is division between the populist, or as I prefer to call them, the radical right parties, on how to approach Russia and what position to adopt vis-à-vis the European Union. So, for example, Hungary has been an extremely problematic actor in terms of stopping the EU from doing anything. Slovakia has also now jumped on the bandwagon. But then you will have someone like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who has made adopting a more or less constructive position towards the European Union a key part of her foreign policy, because she's kind of worked out that if she is constructive on the EU, she can do whatever she wants at home and no one is going to notice. So it is really interesting to kind of observe these dynamics within the far-right party family and see how they position themselves on the European question and how some of their positioning seems to be also shifting. A lot of them have moved from this position of just absolute opposition to the European Union to saying, no, you know what? We're in a position where we can try and change something from within. And it's still aspirational to an extent, but the more they can get people into government, the more these people are going to be in the council. And that is really going to matter in terms of shaping the direction of EU politics going forwards.
Chris, at Globsec, I mean, are you seeing any evidence of what Marta was talking about there, the change from within, where there's clearly lots of scope for power playing there in Prague?
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting point that Marta makes there. I mean, one aspect perhaps of how you're seeing it is that Italy itself is part of this, which you might not expect. As I mentioned, the Slovakians are not particularly part of this. Italy's defense minister is here. So that's one sign of, as you say, even Italy under its current leadership being part of the conversation. The other thing I thought about when Marta was talking there is also that you're seeing this dynamic within countries about how certain countries are perhaps coming back into the fold, which is another aspect of this. So certain countries, obviously the Czech Republic now has taken sort of the leadership of this forum. President Pavel is a strong voice, a supporter of Ukraine. He's been kind of basking in the glow of this. But also Poland is that other interesting example, right, that has gone from a more populist nationalist government, although always kind of supportive of Russia as well. It's important maybe to say, but now under Donald Tusk. So there's a strong Polish participation as well at this conference. They are making their voice heard. We just spoke to a Polish general as well, who's head of Eurocorps, one of the European military aspects there, a corps that works with EU and NATO together. But so like Poland is another interesting example of a country that has a lot to say here and is a strong participant.
Finally, Chris, just what is the sort of like the end purpose of the Globsec Forum, apart from to have an amazing talking shop with a lot of generals? Is there that's a lot of epaulets? Is there a sense at some stage that a message will be delivered, that there'll be some sort of consensus that will come from the forum?
Not really. I do think a forum like this, it's not the kind of forum where there's going to be, a big statement at the end, a joint statement or anything like that, like some kind of summit. Really, this kind of forum is about all the bilaterals and the background conversations that are being had. We did sort of witness one fun exchange, actually, of one of the Polish generals introducing himself to the, Ukrainian deputy defense minister and saying, very, very much on side. We we hope you kill the Reds for us. So sort of, I think these introductions that happen in the hallways are very interesting here. That's really what this is about. As I said, I think the people here are in general agreement on what needs to be done, but it is about that coordination, and particularly at this moment of kind of European unity when it comes to defense, when it comes to Ukraine, just getting on the same page, but also talking amongst each other practically about common cultures and how you actually go about doing it. That's really what this conference has been about.
Chris Cermak, thank you so much. Very briefly, this is all going on the foreign desk, isn't it? When you've done all your interviews and you hoik it all back to London, and then we'll enjoy them for the next few weeks, won't we?
You will enjoy them for the next few weeks on the foreign desk, but also on the news shows. We have, as I say, plenty of interviews that we have brought back. So you'll be hearing them across the news shows and the foreign desk as well on Monocle Radio.
Chris Cermak in Prague, thank you so much for joining us. Marta, just listening to that, the fact when we said, is there going to be any great statement? And you said, no. You just think, right, okay. I mean, yeah, bilateral chats and get the Reds for us is actually where this goes, and it feels as if it's more sort of sleeves rolled up. But are they missing a trick here?
I don't think so. A lot of these things are about building rapport, about meeting people and discussing solutions, even if it's in a lot of the things that happen in formal settings, or what's interesting is what happens in the informal bit before that. So it's typically what they will tell you about the European Council, right? When they're talking all together around the table, everything that was important was already said before while they were chatting in a slightly more informal settings. And I don't really think that a lot of these, particularly in situations where most people are likely to agree, a grand statement isn't going to get you very far. It's a lot more interesting to get a statement when you have a situation where people are clearly in disagreement, where even the smallest formulation of what is said is really important, because it might signal some kind of shift in terms of what the positions are at that stage.
And what positions could we see being consolidated here? I mean, as Chris reported back there, the tectonic plates in the east of Europe at least are shifting, and we'll talk in a moment about the prospect of the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, doing incredibly well in eastern Germany this afternoon.
I think what we're going to see is some kind of general agreement that the EU needs to maintain its commitment to Ukraine, and that is probably what's going to happen. But the problem with that is that it does hide some of the disagreements that exist and some of the fatigue that exists in EU countries concerning sort of continued support for Ukraine, and the fact that some countries are, say, supporting Ukraine openly and then scaling back their commitment. So I think Italy is one of those countries that has been fairly vocal in terms of saying, yeah, of course we support Ukraine and everything, and then being a little bit more reluctant in terms of providing very sort of practical support.
Let's move on to Germany and the elections today. And the fact that, I mean, Yossi, let's bring you in on this one. The fact that if you go to Thuringen today, there is a really strong chance that the far-right Alternative for Germany will do well. There's a lot of checks and balances which will probably block it from actually being able to run the state itself. But at the helm in Thuringen is this man, Björn Höcke, I should say, who has been saying, outwardly Nazi comments. He's actually been tried and convicted of using Nazi language. And, a little while ago, I'm just looking at someone he'd said that he'd been, he was in Berlin and he said, we Germans are the only people in the world that have planted a monument of shame in the heart of their capital, referring to the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. I mean, how have we got here to this stage where in 2024 we are possibly on the brink of seeing neo-Nazis coming, having a very strong voice in Germany and across Europe? Obviously,
it's very disturbing. And as you know, I have a vested interest in this, being second generation, to see that it happens. Because I always thought, and Marta, correct me if I'm wrong, that Germany probably was the only country to learn from history when it comes to Nazism and really take it seriously from education, from banning certain things and try to move forward. And here we have someone which, becoming credible politicians that are going to be elected and can say, what does he expect? To have a monument of pride of what happened between 1933 and 1945 instead of shame? Yes. And there is difference between the shame of 33 and 45 and accountability and transparency, what happened then. And then, of course, to blame generations to come after 45 for that, which is different. And I think even Israel built, the Jewish state built different relations with Germany since as early as the 1950s, with the compensation that helped to build the Jewish state in the 50s and the 60s. But coming back, then I was in Berlin at the beginning of the summer for some meetings, and to see all this billboard with the AfD, I mean, it was, it's really disturbing to think that it can happen. And as you're going in East Berlin near Alexanderplatz, and have all these images of who's marched there all these years back, and say, we need the idea that history moves in a linear way, in a progressive way, and we could leave everything in the past. No, can be regression. And 80 years later, new generation, new issue. But one more thing. I think what we see, and what Marta spoke about populism and right wing, which I completely agree with you, to a large extent, this is a late aftershocks of the end of the Cold War. And we see this, this was the big earthquake of change in Europe. I think in many ways the EU deciding to go wide instead of deep, it make it more coherent. The fact that what globalization and what the EU represent, and I think with these aftershocks that we haven't dealt with that properly, and I think this is a lesson before it's getting too late.
It is that interesting thing that it's 1990, wasn't it? The end of the reunification of Germany. Yeah, and we're looking at 34 years on. So many of those voters who will be going out to vote for the far right today will not have even experienced East and West Germany. Their parents will have done that, and there is that nostalgia, isn't there? But it goes much deeper than that, doesn't it?
Well, I think that part of the problem specifically in East Germany is that a lot of the people who are going to be voting in East Germany have lived through that. So
it's interesting that you use the word East Germany, because it is becoming. It's come back. Eastern Germany is something that we've got used to saying, but you now refer to a place which arguably, which actually properly no longer exists.
Well, it's just that it's quite important in terms of understanding the AfD specifically and the AfD phenomenon, because if you look at their the electoral geography of who votes for the AfD, they are much more successful in the areas that were formerly part of East Germany than they are in West Germany, in the parts that were formerly of West Germany. And I think that part of that is important. So East Germany has spent several decades with this idea that, they were promised that they were going to catch up, and that they were going to catch up to the West. And to some extent this has happened, particularly in economic terms. There has been convergence between the two areas. But there are several other ways in which this hasn't really happened. And now Eastern Germany, or former Eastern Germany, has a much older population. So a lot of young people no longer live there and are leaving. And they have this sentiment of having been politically left behind very much. And that is a lot of what is fueling the vote for the AfD. These are also areas, interestingly, the AfD is a strongly anti-migration party. These are not the areas that experience the strongest levels of migration in Germany. They're not the areas where there is a more implanted migration. But again, this is what they're rallying against. And just finally, another really interesting aspect, I think, about the AfD today is precisely just how much more extreme they've become over time, but also how there are divisions within the party in terms of factions that are more extreme than others. So the German... When we study the radical right, one of the big distinctions that we use is the distinction between the radical right and the extreme right, where the radical right are political parties that accept democracy but are extreme in terms of their positions on migration, for example, and authoritarianism, whereas the extreme right has the same positions on migration and strictly ordered societies, but they also reject democracy.
And there is that use of language, which is just so horrifying now, that when you have Björn Höcke being convicted of using language which harks back to the Nazi era, and yet it doesn't seem to have stopped him, and no one seems to have turned around. Well, we have the political parties who are making sure that they do not get enough of a majority to actually properly seize power, because no one will go into coalition for them. But but how much is that firewall going to be able to hold? And where is the language going? Where is the rhetoric going?
I think the problem with the firewall is that it can sort of hold, but the problem with that firewall is that if you're treating that firewall as just saying, we're not going to collaborate with the far right, so we're not going to help them get into power in any meaningful way, then that is not really enough. The other thing that you have to do if you're a political party of the center is you really shouldn't be copying their ideas and their solutions. And this is what a lot of center-right parties and unfortunately also center-left parties have started doing. Not only have they decided that the fact that the far right is becoming successful means that they have to talk about immigration, which I think as a statement is fine. What they have also taken that to mean is that they should talk about immigration on the same terms as the far right does. And that is where the problem is.
And tell me a little bit about how, well, let's go to Israel now, where we have a government which is almost practically in the grips of the far right, which is pulling the levers in the background, where with Netanyahu's absolutely at the behest of some incredibly unpleasant sounding characters.
Completely, and especially this morning when we woke up to the tragic news of finding 6 of the hostages being murdered, probably by Hamas, and part of not reaching a deal on releasing the hostages has directly to do that the far right is holding actually Netanyahu to ransom willingly, because we all know the story of Netanyahu by now of facing corruption trial, and as a result of it is desperate to stay in power and to derail his court case, and he agreed. He first legitimized the far right, made them a legitimate party to run to the Knesset. They won handsomely 14 seats in the last election, and the one that ready to sit with him and form a coalition with them. And you wait until October 7, assault on the Israeli democracy, on the independence of the judiciary, weakening Israel democracy, weakening the military. And then October 7 happened. And then from then on, you have people within the far right. They talk about reoccupation of Gaza, building settlements in Gaza, settler violence, building a Ben Gvir who is there. Someone that was convicted 8 times is in charge of the police in Israel. And he is building his own militia. That's the direction that it happened. And I think the important thing is, somehow the right managed to drag the conversation towards the end direction, and the center and the left is, instead of stating face with their policies and ideology, is not to deal with issues that otherwise they won't. Instead of, for instance, in Israel, there was a vote on a Palestinian state, 68 against 9. Labour Party, the one that signed the Oslo Accords, abstained. Yair Lapid, that was the prime minister, and from the podium of the General Assembly, talked about two-state solution, abstained. So they are afraid of the right instead of presenting a real alternative. So it goes the same what we see in you, and also in the United States. The shift in the ideology.
You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson, in London. Around the table, Yossi Mekelberg and Marta Lorimer. And now we head to Finland, because joining us now from an archipelago outside of Helsinki is Monocle's correspondent in the Nordic region, Petri Burtsoff. A very good morning to you, Petri. Just describe exactly what your scene is and make us green with jealousy.
Good morning, Emma, and everybody in the studio. So I'm seeing I see a sailboat docked to the island. I see a lot of apple trees, and that's kind of the reason why I'm here and not in Helsinki, because it's the apple harvest season in Finland, and we're basically just drowning in this super sweet, almost candy-like apples that the Finnish archipelago is known for, and just came here to first of all to pick the apples, because otherwise they go bad, and then to bake and eat a lot of apple pie. I should send some your way.
Yes, you should. I'm just saying, is the Monocle salary not sort of like keeping you in apples, that you actually have to go and pick them professionally, or is this just a domestic venture where you actually get the kids to work?
It's the latter. Yes,
Good.
Exactly. It's fun for them.
Excellent. And just tell us about these apples. I mean, okay, tell us about the apples, Petri. We're going to a lovely bucolic moment now. So transport us away from the misery of the rest of the world and take us to your apples.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know any of the specifics of this, but they're like small. They're super sweet. They're nothing like the apples that you buy in the supermarket usually in around Europe. It must be a completely different variety. They're the size of a tennis ball, even a little bit smaller, but just super sweet. And they're kind of, when you bite into the apple, it's not the color of an apple. It's like a mix of apple color, whatever that is, and red. So they're almost like they have this like red veins running inside. They're just super sweet.
And what do you do with them, apart from obviously send your children up the tree or shake them or whatever, or just send them to a bit of forced labour, hard labour there, sending the kids up with the ladder. But when you've got them down, does the Burtsoff family, like the cooking machine, go into full operation, or is it just pick, eat, pass out?
It's both
Okay.
Actually. It's pick and eat as much as you can. I think the kids have eaten like 20 a day. But then it's also, we make a jam out of it, very sweet apple jam, and then we bake apple pies as well. And you can even, I don't have the equipment for that, but I know some professionals, a friend of mine, apple professionals, they make apple juice as well out of the apples.
Ladies and gentlemen, they have apple professionals in Sweden. Sorry, in Finland. My goodness, I'm getting carried away. Yossi, you wanted to make a commentary about apples.
Yeah, just because you don't have to go all the way to Finland. You have to come to my neighborhood, which is also the apple season. And I opened the door the other day and there was a bag with like 15 very green, huge apples. So across the road neighbor, very kind, just left a bag with apples. And as we speak here, I know that there is in our kitchen some apple crumble is prepared, so.
Which I consider a health food.
Completely.
Because it's got fibre, it's got fruit in it. It does all. If you chuck a couple of oats in it, then you can massively do it for breakfast, and no one will have to object.
I know a good friend of mine. He lives in Yorkshire, and he just sent me a picture. He actually picked 1.5 kilos of blackberries around him, and in his household it's apple and blackberry crumble that is.
There's going to be some really lively tummies after all those apples. Sorry, Marta, you wanted to jump in.
It's the same in southeast London, in Lewisham. A lot of my neighbours also have apple trees. I do not have that privilege, but last year there was one of the neighbours who put a massive box of apples on the street and then sent a message on the Facebook page of the neighborhood saying, if anyone wants apples, come and get them.
See?
So I went and got them and made apple crumble, a health food.
A health food. See, Petri Burtsoff, in your archipelago in Finland, if only you'd come to Lewisham, you'd have apple crumble.
Exactly. It just so happens that I made apple crumble yesterday, and I put about 0.5 kilo of sugar in there and some oats as well. So I don't know how much of a health food it is, but I was now inspired because we have blackberries as well in the garden, and we picked most of them. They're in the freezer, but I want to make this apple blue blackberry crumble that Yossi mentioned. I really want to try that out.
Okay, we can help you out with that one. Right, let's get down to business. What's happening in the news there, Petri? Or have you actually paid no attention to what's going on because you've been up a tree?
I have paid attention. And on the topic of food, I mean, let's start with something a bit lighthearted. So apparently, okay, this is really controversial. So the Italians listening to this show, please close your ears. Because one of the most popular pizzas in Sweden, I note, not in Finland, in Sweden, is a ham and banana curry pizza.
No, I'm leaving.
I kid you not. This is not some like experimental pizza that some pizzerias in Stockholm have. It's classified under the classics on the menu. So if you go to a pizzeria in Sweden and look at the classics, there's going to be a banana, curry, ham, and they put peanuts on it as well. And now apparently, I mean, this is nothing new. They've been doing this since after the Second World War. But now the Daily Mail did a piece on this, and now it's even in the Smithsonian magazine, the New York Post. It's all over the all over the foreign press. So Swedes, I think their ambassador to Rome might have some explaining to do.
Oh dear, Marta.
Yeah, look, I don't want to be that Italian.
You're just about to be that
but
Italian.
I am about to be that Italian. There is something deeply wrong and misguided about that combination. I am by no means a purist, except that you don't put chicken on pizza. Chicken does not belong in pizza or pasta, but that is my...
Or pineapple.
Yeah, but that's if you want to be creative with your pizzas, that's fine.
You can have anything as long as it's tomato.
No. What I'm just saying is just those. I cannot imagine a world where those flavors work together, whether it's on pizza or whether you want to call it a pita bread or whatever. It just sounds so wrong. And also, don't call it pizza. Call it something else.
Recap the ingredients for us, would you, Petri? And also explain to us, how did we get here with how did they end up on a pizza?
This is not my general knowledge. It's what I read in the Smithsonian magazine. But apparently, after the Second World War, the Swedes kind of developed a liking for all things Polynesian. So they wanted to just have I think it was just sort of like showing that the war is over and we can get exotic fruit. And they one famous dish that they've developed is this pineapple dish as well. And they went nuts about all exotic fruit. And that's when this pizza was born as well. I mean, I just don't get I kind of see the bananas because, if you put pineapple, then that's a sweet thing. Then bananas is sweet when it caramelizes. But the curry, and the peanuts, I just really don't see this combination at all.
You can have a massaman curry which has peanuts in it. So I'm more on the peanuts. But the fact that the curry and the banana ended up there.
Yeah.
And the three things together, it's alone, they're beautiful. Maybe as a pair they work. But the three of them together, it's like milk, chocolate, and I don't know what, and gorgonzola cheese. Alone, those things kind of work, but not. No. I'm in shock. I can't talk. I can't speak.
Poor Marta. Rescue us, Petri, with something non-fruit related.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about summer houses because I'm at a summer house. So if
stop this, Petri! You're just making it worse.
No, I'm offering you a nice deal. So this is a story by the Finnish public broadcaster YLE, and apparently Russians. So the backstory here is that Russians have bought a lot of, in sort of recent years and decades, they bought a lot of summer cabins close to the Russian border, but on the Finnish side, because they like the lakes and they like the sort of Finnish mentality and there's no people here really. But now they're selling them. They're trying to get rid of them because of the border closure and all the other sanctions. They can't come to the summer cabins and they can't really fix them and keep them up. So they started selling them for ridiculously low prices. So you can get a villa by a lake in Finland's Lake District for 20,000 euros. And the thing is, and this is funny, the people buying them are actually Russians living in Finland, those who hold like dual passports, both Russian and Finnish, and they just smelled an opportunity here, obviously because they speak Russian, so they can contact these people who have this summer houses and just, it's really a buyer's economy here, so they basically snatch some really good deals there. But hey, if you're in the market for a nice summer villa, talk to your friends in Moscow.
Well, obviously, Yossi, Marta and I are busy checking our savings account to see if we can club together and buy a house. Because obviously that sounds like a super bargain. But would your neighbours have to be Russian, or is this an entirely Russian situation, or are the Finns managing to sort of muscle in on their property as well?
I think those who are buying the summer houses, most of them are Russians because you kind of have to speak Russian. And this is the thing, because of the financial sanctions, you can't buy these things with money. You have to basically exchange them for something, maybe apples, or maybe exchange them for something in Russia already, like if you own property in St. Petersburg or Moscow. So that's the deal. But I mean, this is in Finland's Lake District, so this is our this is our summer paradise. This is where all Finns, except for me, have summer houses. So if you buy one, you might be. Find Finnish neighbours as well.
We'll ring you if we do. We'll all club together. What I'm reading now at the moment, just reading in a bit, it says that the Ministry of Defence is preparing draft legislation to place a total ban on Russian citizens buying a real estate in Finland. I mean, how much is bubbling to the surface? So clearly efforts are being made to put an end to this.
Yeah, and this is actually a bigger problem that's been in the press a lot in recent years. So there's been a few cases where Russian citizens buy property in Finland in very sort of strategic locations, close to military sites, and then install all kinds of radar equipment. Very suspicious. So it was a couple of years ago Finland kind of woke up to this and then started confiscating these properties. So now there's still quite a few of those properties left, but now the government really wants a total ban on this just to minimize the risk.
Okay, Petri, anything else you want to talk to us about, or do you need to shin up a tree?
No, one more thing I want to mention, and this is about conscription for women in Latvia. And this is quite an interesting story. So, we've seen ever since the war in Ukraine, some countries in Europe, especially sort of those bordering Russia, we're talking about Russia all the time now, but basically introduce military conscription. And now Latvia, one of the countries bordering Russia in the Baltics, they introduced, I believe it was a couple of years ago, they introduced conscription, and now they want to include women as well. So they want to have a mandatory military service for men and women. And this is something quite novel in Europe. I think it's only in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark introduced it this year. And then I believe Israel is the only country that I know of, Yossi can confirm this, but that has mandatory both for women and men.
Yossi, step in, explain how it works in Israel for us and whether it works.
It works, and this is from the beginning, from 1948. Men went for 3 years and women for 2 years. But right now, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. There are actually women pilots. They are in combat units. As we speak, in Gaza and in other places, they fulfill all sorts of duties. It's not on, it used to be mainly in the rear doing secretarial and other jobs that are not in combat units. Nowadays, they are, from tanks to artillery to F-16. So yes, it works, and I think it has also to do with necessity. But this is going now for 76 years.
And Scandinavia has a long history, doesn't it, Petri, of that sort of idea of. I know that in Denmark for a very long time they've had women on the front line, and it seems to make the teams work better. How's it gone down in Latvia? Given the fact that, as you say, it's only last year that they reintroduced conscription, and as far as I can gather, what they do is they select conscripts at random, which means you could wake up one morning to an email or a letter through your door saying, off you go, drop your stuff, you're going off to join the military.
Exactly. It's a lottery, basically. It's like literally it is a lottery. So you get a number and then they choose you. So it's like a selective, I think the term is selective conscription, but now they want to extend this to women as well. And it's a political piece that I'm reading, and it says here that it's politically still quite a sensitive issue. I mean, conscription in general has a lot of support in Latvia, but then extending it to women is more of a contentious issue here. And the plan is, just to be clear, the plan is, this is from the Defense Ministry, so the plan is to do this by 2028, so not exactly now.
Why is it contentious?
I think it's contentious because there is no tradition of this in any of these countries. So it's just a thing that people generally regard as men having to do. Obviously I can't speak for the Latvians, but as a Finn, we have mandatory military service for men only. I've done mine, and now there's talk of introducing it. Not the service, but just the sort of the day when you go. And this like conscription day when you go and enlist, and all men have to go. And now the government is planning to make that mandatory for women, just to sort of go, and then they hope that maybe some of these women will do the service. I know a couple of thousand women do it every year in Finland. But yeah, that's a good question. Wouldn't it be beneficial for the society if everybody did it? That's a really big question.
My mother was a soldier already in the 1950s.
Marta, how do you think that would go down in Italy?
Well, Italy actually abolished compulsory conscription for anyone born after 1986. I wouldn't expect it to go down particularly well because Italy is still very much a patriarchal society. So I can expect people in the street going, "Oh, but women cannot be soldiers. We have to protect them. You shouldn't touch women with the flower." But I also think I I'm not an expert in military stuff, but I also think that within countries that have actual functioning standing armies, the idea of conscription is sometimes quite controversial, because what you're getting are people who are not there because they want to do it, and that you're going to have to train and that are then going to leave. Whereas having an actual, system where you have a paid military of people who decided to do this is much more efficient. So this is, I can see the case for that, unless, of course, you need a lot of bodies, which I think is the reason why some of the countries that are particularly concerned about Russia are really getting back into the idea of mandatory conscription and trying to get a lot more people into it than they did before.
You can build an ethos from a very young age that as a conscript you really want to serve in the army. And if you look at youngsters in Israel, despite the wars, despite the loss, it doesn't change the motivation to join actually combat units, the elite units, becoming pilots, to be reconnaissance units, the most dangerous one. Actually, it's the less dangerous one. It's more difficult to recruit. And as far as women, because there are so many professions in the army that women can do better because the level of concentration and other.
I'm glad you said that, Yossi.
No, it's true.
Petri, briefly, you've got a day to do. What's on the Burtsoff cards? What's on the agenda today?
Picking more
Excellent.
apples, obviously. And then this is important. I have to take apart a trampoline that I installed when the summer season began, and it took me 4 hours to assemble, and now I have to disassemble it all. I am not looking forward to. So please, can we just keep talking for a couple of more hours so I don't have to do it?
Absolutely no problem. We have no difficulty with that. Mind the springs. Petri Burtsoff with his trampoline and his apples in Finland. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle on Sunday. Still with me, trampoline-free, Yossi Mekelberg and Marta Lorimer. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes to squeeze into the end of the programme. What have you spotted in the papers, everybody? What did you spot, Marta?
So I spotted in the papers and in my desperate attempts to try and get tickets for Oasis. I have already seen them twice, so I was like, I don't really need to do this. But I did decide that I wanted to be part of that big social experiment of trying to get tickets. And I discovered that now dynamic pricing has been introduced to the UK. And I find that as a regular concert goer, extremely frustrating and extremely wrong. So I did not get tickets in the end. I decided I'm going to keep my memories from the 2007 and 2008 tours.
It was a bit messy by that stage. It
was a bit messy, but this was in Italy, so it was fine. I was 18. I didn't know any better. And then the other thing that is sort of in the musical news for me was, the release of Nick Cave's latest album, which I was very excited about. I have listened to it yesterday all day and today as well. It's a good album.
And you're not gloomy.
And I'm not gloomy because it's a very joyful album. I think compared to the last two, which really hit you like a punch in the stomach, this is a much happier album. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing him live in November. I think it's going to be a spiritual experience.
I have tickets already.
It's interesting you say that, because exactly 3 years ago I saw Nick Cave in Fairfield in Croydon, believe it or not. And
you go to all the best places.
Hey, Fairfield is a place that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones used to play. It's a very famous venue. And I got it for my birthday, and you almost go and think, it almost will be Peaky Blinders sing-along. And then instead of it, there were the two very depressing, also that of Ghosting and Carnage, which I love Nick Cave.
But it was the tour. It was just him and Warren Ellis.
Yeah, and Warren Ellis. And fair to him. The fact that it is age, it comes with new material. And he's not afraid, because you have some of the tours, and Oasis are not going to release any new material. They're just going to cash in. Tickets go for $6,000 now.
It would be good if they introduced something new, wouldn't it?
Exactly. Why do you have this tour if not, in their case, is money? In Nick Cave, he evolves. He's always looking for something new. And this, it's not just a popcorn. It's not just a concert. It's an experience with Nick Cave. So it was one of the best that I ever got.
I find it strange with Nick Cave that I find his music unlistenable at home, because I want to survive. But then absolutely amazing to watch on stage, shamanic in his presence, and there are very few performers like that now.
Yeah, I've seen him several times, and I would say in terms of sort of live performers I've seen, he's really I would say he's up there with Springsteen in terms of creating that kind of collective experience of music. So I'm really excited because I also went to see him with Warren Ellis, and I was supposed to see him in 2020. Of course, that concert got cancelled, so I haven't seen him since 2018, and I'm 2017, I think, actually, and I'm ready for it.
We've got 3 minutes now. What do you want to talk about for the last 3 minutes, Yossi?
Oh, I saw more on the lighter is the Venice Film Festival.
Excellent. To what?
And it's not just the movies, it's all the idea of the film festivals. As the film industry is changing dramatically, we don't go to cinemas as much as, and we saw all things on all sort of platforms. And I think Isabel, who is the judge in this festival, is talking about it in an interview, is how we need to actually revive the idea of going to the cinemas and the film festival, whether it's Berlin or Sundance or Cannes, of course, and here Venice, who is going. If you win the prize, the big prize in case the line, then you are guaranteed. That many millions going to watch you, and probably some of the big ones, Apple or Netflix, will buy it and say that it's their original, even if not necessarily the case. But the idea that you have over, 12 days watching not only the 24 movies that compete, but along on the fringe of these movies, and it brings all the industry together. And then the focus of people around the world really helps an industry that is struggling, because I don't know if you don't make money. I just know that because my brother is a film producer, is that you don't make money from the movies in cinema, you make it from selling popcorn and soda.
And that is actually the trouble that we talked. Let's go back to the buying tickets for concerts. Yes, we have dynamic pricing for Oasis, but sometimes you think, I'll step up and I'll pay a little more, but not much more now to go to a gig. Or indeed, I always harp on about the fact that the opera is now cheaper than the theatre here in London. And yet going to the cinema, you don't get... It's literally just going to watch a film, something that you should consider like pretty everyday, a small treat, not on the major steps up. And yet you suddenly think, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel like good value anymore. Where have we got this wrong?
Yeah, I think, just a minute, we work at home, we discuss this. And now we have the entertainment at home, and we just kind of build our own sort of prisons at home when we don't go out. And also the sense of occasion. Again, we can listen to Nick Cave on very sophisticated, great sound.
I don't.
At home.
It's too upsetting.
No, I do actually. And the same with Oasis. But the idea of the sense of occasion and going out and having popcorn, if you like it, or an ice cream, it's the idea. It's a social thing, and also experience the same thing with other people, not on your own or just at home. And I think this is important. And I think this is an interview is how we revive it on a smaller scale, on a bigger scale, but it's different.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to cry in a room with strangers though, because I don't go to the cinema much. But last year was the first time I went to the cinema, not a fairly long time, but I went to see Past Lives. And maybe I should have gone and seen that movie at the end of a working day, at the beginning of term, on a Monday. But I was like bawling by the end. I was just like, when they started showing that, I was just like, I kept my husband, I was like, we can't leave just yet, because I'm crying and I don't want people to see me like this. So I kind of...
It's dark enough.
It's
yeah, exactly. It's dark enough, but still, I feel that the people around me could kind of guess, that I wasn't fully okay.
Okay. I said just because sometimes I ask my brother when he finishes a movie, can you send me just the link to watching TV? And he says, no. You're going,
You're the worst
I didn't
problem.
invest all this in great sound and the coloring and all of this, all in different places in the world for you to watch it on TV.
Well,
from your iPad.
Exactly.
You've destroyed your own brother's livelihood. Yossi Mekelberg, Marta Lorimer, Petri Burtsoff and Chris Chermak. My thanks to all my guests today, because that's all we have time. Thanks too to the producer Mariella Bevan and studio engineer Steph Chungu. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday returns next week. But until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend, whatever you get up to.